The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training facility as Lieutenant Sarah Chen made her way through the main gate. She had arrived 3 days early for her new assignment, wanting to familiarize herself with the base layout and personnel before officially taking command. Dressed in civilian clothes, she carried a simple backpack and wore comfortable walking shoes, appearing no different from any other visitor or contractor who might enter the facility. The base was alive with activity as soldiers went about their morning routines. Sarah observed everything with keen interest, noting the discipline and organization that characterized military life. She had spent the last 8 years climbing the ranks, earning her position through dedication, strategic thinking, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. Her new role as base operations commander was both an honor and a significant responsibility. As she walked past the equipment maintenance area, Sarah noticed a young soldier struggling with a heavy crate near the vehicle depot. The woman appeared to be in her early 20s, with determination written across her face despite the obvious difficulty of her task. Without hesitation, Sarah approached and offered assistance. "Need a hand with that?" Sarah asked, setting down her backpack. The soldier, Private Maria Rodriguez, looked up with surprise and gratitude. "That's very kind of you, ma'am, but I can manage. It's just a bit heavier than I expected." "Nonsense," Sarah replied, moving to the other end of the crate. "Teamwork makes everything easier." Together, they lifted the heavy equipment and moved it to its designated location. Private Rodriguez wiped sweat from her brow and extended her hand in thanks. "I really appreciate that. I'm Maria, by the way." "Sarah," she replied, shaking the young woman's hand firmly. "What's in the crate that made it so heavy?" "Communications equipment for the new command center setup. We're expecting a new commanding officer next week, and everything needs to be perfect." Maria's enthusiasm was evident as she spoke about the preparations. "I've heard she's really accomplished, youngest person to achieve this rank in the division's history." Sarah smiled slightly at the unknown praise, but said nothing about her identity. "Sounds like someone worth meeting." "Definitely. I hope I get the chance to work directly with her. I've been studying communications technology in my spare time, hoping to specialize in that area." Maria's ambition impressed Sarah, reminding her of her own early military days. Their conversation was interrupted by a loud, harsh voice cutting through the morning air. "Rodriguez, what are you doing socializing when there's work to be done?" Both women turned to see Sergeant Marcus Thompson striding toward them with an expression of unmistakable anger. Thompson was known throughout the base for his rigid adherence to hierarchy and his particularly harsh treatment of junior enlisted personnel. He was a man in his mid-40s who had reached his current rank through years of service but had never advanced beyond sergeant due to his abrasive personality and inability to inspire rather than intimidate. "Sergeant Thompson, I was just moving the communications equipment as ordered," Maria replied respectfully, though Sarah could detect the underlying tension in her voice. Thompson's eyes swept over Sarah dismissively before focusing back on Rodriguez. "And who authorized you to recruit random civilians to help with military equipment?" "I offered to help," Sarah interjected calmly. She was managing fine on her own, but the crate was heavy. Thompson's attention shifted to Sarah, his expression growing even more contemptuous. "Civilians don't belong in operational areas. This is a military facility, not a charity organization." Sarah remained composed, though she noted Thompson's unnecessarily aggressive tone and the way he seemed to relish wielding his authority. "I understand protocol, Sergeant. I was simply offering assistance to someone who appeared to need it." "What you understand," Thompson shot back, "is irrelevant. You don't belong here, and Rodriguez should know better than to accept help from unauthorized personnel." Private Rodriguez stepped forward slightly, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation but willing to defend the stranger who had helped her. "Sir, she was just being helpful. The equipment is now properly positioned as required." Thompson's face reddened with anger at what he perceived as insubordination. "Are you questioning my assessment, Rodriguez? Are you suggesting I don't know how to evaluate a situation?" "No, sir. I was just explaining what happened." "What happened," Thompson said, his voice rising, "is that you allowed a civilian into a restricted area and compromised security protocols. What happened is that you prioritized convenience over proper procedure." Sarah watched the interaction with growing concern, not for herself, but for the young private who was clearly being subjected to an unfair and disproportionate response. Thompson's behavior exhibited several red flags that suggested he regularly abused his authority with subordinates. "Perhaps we should all take a step back," Sarah suggested diplomatically. No harm was done, and the task was completed successfully. Thompson whirled on her with fury. "Did I ask for your opinion? Did anyone here request input from some random woman who wandered onto a military base?" "Marcus," Sarah said quietly, using his first name deliberately, "your tone is inappropriate." The use of his first name shocked Thompson into momentary silence, primarily because it suggested a familiarity that didn't align with Sarah's civilian appearance. However, his anger quickly reasserted itself, amplified by what he perceived as disrespect from someone he viewed as beneath his notice. "My tone?" Thompson stepped closer to Sarah, attempting to use his physical presence to intimidate her. "My tone is exactly what it should be when dealing with civilians who don't know their place." Sarah stood her ground, neither retreating nor escalating the confrontation. She had dealt with bullies throughout her military career and recognized Thompson's tactics. Everyone deserves to be treated with basic respect, regardless of rank or status. "Respect is earned," Thompson snarled, "and civilians earn respect by staying out of military affairs and showing proper deference to those who serve." Private Rodriguez watched the exchange with growing alarm, sensing that the situation was spiraling beyond what anyone had intended. She could see that Sarah was remaining remarkably calm despite Thompson's increasingly aggressive behavior, but she also knew the sergeant's reputation for taking his anger out on junior personnel long after incidents like this had ended. Thompson seemed to reach a decision, his expression shifting to one of cruel satisfaction. "Since you're so concerned with helping military personnel, maybe you'd like a more direct experience of military hierarchy." Sarah raised an eyebrow, curious about where this was heading but not particularly concerned for her own welfare. "What did you have in mind, Sergeant?" Thompson pointed at his dusty boots, which showed signs of the morning's activities around the base. "These boots need cleaning. Since you're so eager to assist with military matters, you can start by getting down on your knees and making them spotless." The request hung in the air like a challenge, clearly designed to humiliate Sarah and demonstrate Thompson's authority in front of Rodriguez and any other personnel who might be watching. Several soldiers had indeed begun to notice the commotion and were observing from a respectful distance. Private Rodriguez gasped audibly. "Sergeant, she's not military personnel." "She can't be ordered to." "Can't be ordered to what, Rodriguez?" Thompson's attention shifted back to the young private. "Can't be ordered to show respect for the uniform?" "Can't be expected to contribute meaningfully if she wants to involve herself in military operations." Sarah looked at Thompson's boots, then back at his face, reading the situation with the strategic mind that had earned her rapid advancement through the officer ranks. She understood that this moment was about more than boots or respect or even hierarchy. This was about a man who had found someone he believed he could humiliate without consequence, and it was about establishing a power dynamic that would likely affect his treatment of subordinates long after this incident. "You want me to clean your boots?" Sarah asked, her voice steady and thoughtful. "I want you to get down on your knees and clean them properly," Thompson clarified, savoring what he believed would be his moment of triumph. "Since you're so interested in helping around here." Sarah nodded slowly, as if considering the request seriously. She could see Rodriguez's distressed expression and the uncomfortable looks of the soldiers who had gathered to watch. She could also see Thompson's anticipation of what he believed would be a satisfying demonstration of his authority over someone he viewed as an outsider. "All right," Sarah said finally, her voice carrying a note that Thompson was too focused on his perceived victory to properly analyze. "I'll clean your boots." Thompson's smile broadened as Sarah appeared to acquiesce to his demand. Around them, the gathered soldiers exchanged glances, some looking uncomfortable with their sergeant's behavior, while others seemed curious about how the situation would resolve. Sarah began to lower herself toward Thompson's boots, her movement deliberate and controlled. Thompson stood straighter, clearly relishing what he saw as a complete capitulation to his authority. Private Rodriguez watched with a mixture of admiration for Sarah's grace under pressure and anger at Thompson's unnecessary cruelty. As Sarah knelt near Thompson's boots, she maintained perfect composure, her expression neither defiant nor submissive but simply focused on the task at hand. Thompson basked in what he believed was his moment of absolute control, unaware that everything was about to change in ways he could never have anticipated. The morning sun continued to shine down on the scene, casting sharp shadows that would soon shift in directions that no one present could have predicted. In the distance, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed across the facility grounds, though none of the participants in the unfolding drama had yet noticed their significance. Sarah's hand reached toward Thompson's boot, the motion steady and sure, while around them the base continued its daily operations, oblivious to the fact that this moment would soon become a story told and retold throughout the entire command structure. The approaching footsteps grew closer, bringing with them a resolution that would redefine everyone's understanding of respect, authority, and the complex dynamics that govern military life. Thompson watched Sarah's approach to his boots with satisfaction, convinced that he had successfully established his dominance over both the civilian woman and, by extension, Private Rodriguez, who would surely think twice before accepting unauthorized help in the future. He had no way of knowing that his assumptions about power, respect, and hierarchy were about to be challenged in the most direct and unmistakable way possible. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reveal the true nature of leadership, the importance of treating all people with dignity, and the sometimes surprising ways that justice manifests itself in the structured world of military service. The sound of military boots striking pavement in perfect rhythm grew steadily louder, though Sergeant Thompson remained too focused on his perceived moment of triumph to notice. Sarah, positioned near his feet, had heard the approaching footsteps almost immediately and recognized their significance. Her training had taught her to remain aware of her surroundings even in stressful situations, and something about the cadence of those steps suggested they belonged to someone of considerable importance. Private Rodriguez, standing awkwardly to the side, was the first of the group to turn toward the sound. Her face immediately shifted from distressed concern to something approaching panic as she recognized the figure approaching their small gathering. Colonel James Harrison, the base commander and Thompson's ultimate superior, was walking directly toward them with a measured pace that suggested both purpose and growing curiosity about the scene unfolding before him. Colonel Harrison was a man in his early 50s whose reputation for fairness was matched only by his intolerance for behavior that reflected poorly on military professionalism. He had commanded the base for 3 years and was known for his hands-on approach to leadership, often walking through different areas to observe operations and interact with personnel at all levels. This morning walk had been routine until he noticed the unusual gathering near the equipment depot. "Attention!" Private Rodriguez called out automatically, snapping to attention as military protocol demanded. Her voice carried clearly across the area, finally breaking through Thompson's concentration on his anticipated humiliation of Sarah. Thompson's head snapped up, his expression shifting from smug satisfaction to confusion and then to poorly concealed alarm as he spotted Colonel Harrison approaching. The sergeant immediately straightened to attention, though his position remained awkward given that Sarah was still kneeling near his feet. The incongruity of the scene was not lost on the colonel, whose experienced eyes quickly assessed the situation with growing concern. Sarah, still positioned near Thompson's boots, made no immediate move to rise. Instead, she remained composed and alert, watching the approaching colonel with interest while maintaining her current position. Her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the visible tension that had suddenly gripped both Thompson and Rodriguez. "Sergeant Thompson," Colonel Harrison called out as he drew closer, his voice carrying the authority that came with years of command experience. "Would you care to explain what's happening here?" Thompson's mouth opened and closed several times as he struggled to formulate a response that would cast his behavior in a favorable light. The presence of his commanding officer had transformed what he believed was a private display of authority into a public examination of his judgment and professionalism. "Sir," Thompson began, his voice lacking its earlier confidence, "I was just ensuring that proper respect is shown for military personnel and property." Colonel Harrison's gaze swept the scene, taking in Sarah's kneeling position, Thompson's dusty boots, Private Rodriguez's uncomfortable stance, and the small group of soldiers who had gathered to watch the proceedings. His expression remained neutral, but those who knew him well would have recognized the subtle signs of displeasure beginning to form. "I see," the colonel said slowly. And this demonstration of respect involves having a civilian kneel at your feet? Sarah chose that moment to speak, her voice clear and steady. "Good morning, Colonel Harrison." The colonel's attention shifted to Sarah, and something in her tone caused him to look at her more carefully. There was something familiar about her voice, though her current position and civilian clothing made immediate recognition difficult. "Good morning," he replied, his tone gentle but curious. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "We haven't met in person," Sarah confirmed, still maintaining her position near Thompson's boots, "but we've corresponded extensively about my upcoming assignment." Colonel Harrison's expression shifted slightly as recognition began to dawn. The voice, the composure under pressure, the careful choice of words, all of these elements were starting to align with his expectations of someone very specific. Thompson, oblivious to the undercurrents of the conversation, felt compelled to reassert control over what he still believed was his situation to manage. "Sir, this civilian was interfering with military operations and showing disrespect for proper protocol. I was teaching her about military hierarchy." "Teaching her about military hierarchy," the colonel repeated slowly, his tone suggesting that he was finding Thompson's explanation increasingly difficult to accept. "By requiring her to clean your boots. She volunteered to help with military operations," Thompson said, his confidence beginning to return as he convinced himself that his interpretation of events would be accepted. "I felt it was appropriate to give her a more complete understanding of how the military functions." Colonel Harrison nodded thoughtfully, then addressed Sarah directly. "And what's your perspective on Sergeant Thompson's educational approach?" Sarah smiled slightly, expression that somehow managed to convey both amusement and complete composure despite her undignified position. "I've learned quite a bit about the sergeant's approach to leadership and his understanding of military values." The colonel's expression grew more serious as he processed Sarah's diplomatic response and its implications. "Would you mind standing up? I'd like to continue this conversation on more equal terms." "Of course," Sarah replied, rising to her feet with fluid grace. As she stood and brushed dust from her civilian clothes, something about her posture and bearing began to strike Colonel Harrison as increasingly familiar. Thompson watched the exchange with growing unease, sensing that the dynamic was shifting in ways he didn't understand. "Sir, if I may, I was simply trying to maintain appropriate standards." "Sergeant," the colonel interrupted gently, "I think it would be best if you remained quiet while I sort out exactly what happened here." Turning back to Sarah, Colonel Harrison extended his hand. "I'm Colonel James Harrison, base commander." "And you are?" Sarah reached into her pocket and withdrew a military identification card, handing it to the colonel with a slight smile. "Lieutenant Sarah Chen, reporting as ordered, sir. Though I wasn't scheduled to officially arrive until Monday." The change in Colonel Harrison's expression was immediate and dramatic. His eyes widened as he read the identification, then looked back at Sarah with a mixture of recognition, respect, and barely contained amusement at the situation's absurdity. Behind them, Private Rodriguez gasped audibly as she realized she had been working alongside the new commanding officer without knowing it. Thompson's face drained of color as the full implications of what had just been revealed began to sink in. "Lieutenant Chen," the colonel said formally, his voice carrying new respect and acknowledgement of her rank. "Welcome to the base. I apologize for this unusual introduction to our operations." Sarah returned his professional greeting with equal formality. "Thank you, sir. I've actually found it quite educational. I've learned a great deal about the base culture and leadership approaches in just a short time." Colonel Harrison's gaze shifted to Thompson, whose military bearing had completely collapsed. The sergeant stood frozen, his face pale and his eyes wide with the realization that he had just attempted to humiliate his new commanding officer. "Sergeant Thompson," the colonel said quietly, his voice carrying unmistakable authority, "would you like to revise your explanation of recent events?" Thompson's mouth moved soundlessly for several moments before he managed to speak. "Sir, I didn't know she was in civilian clothes. So your treatment of civilians is generally this disrespectful?" the colonel asked pointedly. "No, sir, I thought Thompson's attempts at explanation trailed off as he realized that every word he spoke was making his situation worse. Sarah stepped forward slightly, drawing attention back to herself. "Colonel Harrison, if I may," Sergeant Thompson was operating under incomplete information. His error in judgment regarding my identity is understandable. Both the Colonel and Thompson looked at Sarah with surprise, though for different reasons. The Colonel was impressed by her diplomatic handling of what could have been a career-ending situation for the sergeant, while Thompson was stunned that someone he had just tried to humiliate was offering him a graceful way out of his predicament. However, Sarah continued, her tone remaining professional but gaining a slight edge. His treatment of Private Rodriguez and his general approach to dealing with people he perceived as having lower status raises some concerns about leadership philosophy and military values. Private Rodriguez, who had been standing at attention throughout the entire exchange, felt a surge of gratitude that someone in authority had noticed and was addressing Thompson's behavior toward enlisted personnel. Colonel Harrison nodded slowly, clearly appreciating Sarah's balanced assessment of the situation. Lieutenant Chen, I think we should continue this conversation in my office, where we can discuss your observations about base operations in more detail. I would welcome that opportunity, sir, Sarah replied. Turning to Thompson, the colonel's expression grew stern. Sergeant, you will report to my office at 1400 for a full discussion of this incident and its implications for your continued service at this base. Thompson managed to croak out a, "Yes, sir," though his voice was barely audible. Private Rodriguez, the colonel continued, please ensure that the communications equipment is properly secured. Then report to Lieutenant Chen's office once it's established. I believe she may have some questions about base operations that could benefit from your insights. Rodriguez straightened with surprise and pride at being directly addressed by the base commander and included in operational discussions. Yes, sir. As the colonel and Sarah began to walk toward the administrative buildings, leaving Thompson to contemplate his situation, the gathered soldiers slowly dispersed, already beginning to spread word of what they had witnessed. The story would grow and evolve with each telling, but the core elements would remain consistent. A new commanding officer had arrived, demonstrated grace under pressure, and revealed the true character of those around her through their actions rather than their words. Thompson remained standing alone near the equipment depot. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. The boots he had been so insistent about having cleaned suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the magnitude of his error in judgment and the questions now being raised about his fitness for leadership. Private Rodriguez finished securing the communications equipment, her mind racing with the implications of everything she had witnessed. She had started the morning as a junior enlisted person, hoping to someday work with the new commanding officer, and now found herself personally invited to participate in operational discussions. More importantly, she had seen firsthand how true leadership responded to adversity and how it protected those who couldn't protect themselves. The morning sun was now higher in the sky, casting shorter shadows across the base. The routine activities of military life continued around them, but for everyone involved in the morning's events, nothing would ever be quite the same. Leadership, respect, and the complex dynamics of military hierarchy had been redefined through a single encounter that began with a simple offer to help move a heavy crate. As Sarah walked toward what would soon become her domain of responsibility, she reflected on the morning's events and what they revealed about the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead in her new command. The true test of leadership, she knew, was not how one handled situations where authority was acknowledged and respected, but how one responded when that authority was challenged or unknown. Thompson's boots remained uncleaned, a small but symbolic reminder that respect built through intimidation and humiliation was neither genuine nor lasting, while respect earned through character and competence would endure long after the dust had settled on this remarkable morning. 3 weeks had passed since the incident at the equipment depot, and the story had become legendary throughout the base. Every new arrival heard some version of the tale about the commanding officer who had knelt to clean a sergeant's boots before revealing her true identity. The details varied with each telling, but the impact remained consistent. Lieutenant Sarah Chen had earned the respect and loyalty of her personnel through actions that demonstrated both strength and humility. Sarah stood in her office, reviewing reports that painted a comprehensive picture of base operations. The morning light streaming through her windows illuminated documents that told stories of efficiency improvements, morale increases, and operational successes that had marked her first month of command. Her leadership style, which emphasized collaboration and mutual respect, had created ripple effects throughout the entire organization. A knock at her door interrupted her review. "Come in," she called out. Private Rodriguez entered, carrying a folder of communications reports. In the weeks since their first meeting, Maria had been promoted to specialist and had been assigned as Sarah's aide for communications and technology matters. Her enthusiasm and competence had made her invaluable in implementing new systems and protocols. "Good morning, Lieutenant," Rodriguez said, placing the folder on Sarah's desk. "The quarterly efficiency reports are ready for your review. The numbers are quite impressive." Sarah smiled as she opened the folder. The statistics inside confirmed what she had been observing firsthand. Response times had improved across all departments, training scores had increased significantly, and most importantly, personnel satisfaction ratings had reached historic highs for the base. "These are excellent results, Maria," Sarah said, using the informal address that had become natural between them. "What's your assessment of the communication system upgrades?" "Beyond expectations," Rodriguez replied enthusiastically. "The new protocols you implemented have reduced response time by 40%, and the cross-departmental coordination has eliminated most of the bottlenecks we were experiencing." As they discussed the technical details, another knock came at the door. Sarah called for entry and Colonel Harrison stepped into the office, his expression carrying both professional authority and personal warmth. "Good morning, Lieutenant Specialist Rodriguez." He greeted them formally before his tone shifted to something more conversational. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything critical." "Not at all, sir," Sarah replied, gesturing toward chairs. "We were just reviewing the quarterly reports. The numbers are quite encouraging." Colonel Harrison settled into his seat and accepted the report Sarah offered. As he read through the statistics, his expression grew increasingly pleased. "These improvements are remarkable, Sarah. In just 3 weeks, you've managed to transform operations in ways that typically take months or years to achieve." "The credit belongs to the personnel, sir," Sarah replied diplomatically. "They were capable of excellence all along. Sometimes it just takes the right environment to bring out the best in people." Rodriguez shifted slightly in her chair, clearly wanting to contribute to the conversation. Colonel Harrison noticed her subtle movement and encouraged her to speak. "Specialist Rodriguez, you've worked closely with Lieutenant Chen during this transition. What's your perspective on these changes?" "Sir, if I may," Rodriguez began, her confidence growing as she spoke. "The lieutenant's approach has created an atmosphere where people feel valued and heard. When personnel believe their contributions matter, they naturally perform at higher levels." Sarah nodded approvingly at Rodriguez's insight. The young specialist had demonstrated exceptional growth during their time working together, developing not just technical skills but also leadership potential that Sarah was actively nurturing. Colonel Harrison closed the report and looked directly at Sarah. "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you. The incident with Sergeant Thompson 3 weeks ago has had consequences that extend beyond what we initially anticipated." Sarah's expression grew more serious. "What kind of consequences, sir?" "Several, actually," the colonel replied. "First, Thompson has been transferred to a position where his interactions with junior personnel are limited and supervised. His behavior that morning was apparently part of a pattern that we had not fully recognized." Rodriguez looked surprised at this revelation, though Sarah simply nodded as if she had expected such news. "Additionally," Colonel Harrison continued, "word of your handling of that situation has reached higher command levels. The way you managed Thompson's attempt at humiliation while protecting Rodriguez and maintaining military professionalism has been noted by people who make decisions about promotions and advanced assignments." Sarah felt a mixture of satisfaction and concern. Recognition was welcome, but she hoped it was based on her overall performance, rather than a single incident. "I appreciate that, sir, though I hope my work here speaks for itself beyond that one morning." "It absolutely does," the colonel assured her. "These quarterly reports demonstrate sustained excellence across every metric we track. But the Thompson incident revealed something about your character that can't be measured in statistics." Rodriguez leaned forward slightly, curiosity evident in her expression. "What has the response been from other personnel, sir?" Colonel Harrison smiled at the question. "That's perhaps the most interesting part of this whole situation. The story has become something of a teaching tool throughout the base and beyond. People are talking about what real leadership looks like under pressure." Sarah found herself curious about how the story was being retold and what lessons people were drawing from it. What version of events has become the accepted narrative? Actually, it's quite accurate, the colonel replied. The core elements remain consistent. A commanding officer arrived early, helped a struggling soldier, faced down a bully, and maintained dignity throughout an attempt at public humiliation. People are talking about how you protected Rodriguez, showed grace under pressure, and demonstrated that true authority doesn't need to humiliate others to establish itself. Rodriguez nodded enthusiastically. The story has inspired changes in how people interact across all rank levels, sir. I've seen sergeants and corporals taking more collaborative approaches with their teams. Sarah was pleased to hear that positive changes were spreading throughout the organization, but she remained focused on practical matters. What about Thompson? How is he adjusting to his new position? Colonel Harrison's expression grew thoughtful. That's actually why I wanted to speak with you today. Thompson has requested a meeting with you. Both Sarah and Rodriguez looked surprised at this news.